Hello, America. Good afternoon. I'm used to long afternoons and came over here and got caught in the motorcade, which is a very DC thing to do, even though I try to avoid them as much as possible. But here I am, and I'm happy to be here. So my group, Edison Foundation, has a program called the Institute for Electric Innovation. And for the past 4 years, I've been working there, researching just general trends, compiling information on how the electric utilities, so my discussion is not going to be focused on the gas side. The folks at AGA can speak to their efforts, but how the electric utilities are supporting energy efficiency investments in homes and businesses throughout the U.S. And pretty much in every single state at varying levels. We've been partnering with the Consortium for Energy Efficiency, CEE, a Boston-based group, for the past 4 to 5 years on a survey of customer-funded EE programs. And the collection of information is broken out by roughly 4 sectors: commercial, residential, industrial, and low-income when we can get the data, which, to be honest with you, has been challenging because some groups do break out low-income specifically, and others just lump them into a general residential category. And a lot of the marketing or administrative expenses are also not broken up by the actual programmatic efforts. It's a general shared cost, which could be attributed to some low-income program activities. So, as I mentioned, I've been with the Institute for Electric Innovation for, oh yeah, no problem. It's fine. I can continue. So for the past, I mentioned, I've been there for 4 years, and the group was actually set up 5 or 6 years ago based upon a pledge that Jim Rogers, the former CEO of Duke Energy, gave at the Clinton Global Initiative, where Jim, always a forward-looking man, discussed how the industry needs to develop business models around energy efficiency, because it's here, it's coming, it's something that one is in some ways owed to the customers, and to develop a coalition of utilities that would be willing to invest in research from a, I guess, a utility perspective on how to make that efforts, occur or happen. So that's how we were founded, was through a pledge by multiple utility CEOs. And since then, we've been, again, working with CEE, working with ACEEE, NRDC, on policies, on regulations that make both business sense for the utilities and also benefits for them. Since a little bit about the numbers that we collect, over the past 7 years, U.S. customer-funded electric efficiency has increased from around $2.7 billion in 2007 to $7 billion in 2013. Now, this number includes demand or load management programs, demand response programs, which are roughly 18%. So if you strip away 18% from the 2.7 and 7 billion, you get roughly 2.4 billion in 2007 and maybe around 6 billion in 2013. Still a fairly large amount of money. Lawrence Berkeley National Labs projects 2 different scenarios based upon current policies such as energy efficiency, resource standards, decoupling, and lost revenue adjustment mechanisms and performance incentives across basically half the states in the nation. And their projections for 2025 under their medium case scenario is $8.1 billion of funding for energy efficiency and $12.2 billion in their high case scenario. So that's roughly a 50% increase from what occurred today to a doubling. And we feel confident that that will occur. There's a couple of reasons why we think this will occur. One is that there's, at the national level, there's a draft rule issued by the EPA, the Clean Air Act Section 111D, which is right now it's still draft, but it has 4 major components. The fourth component component is an increase in energy efficiency nationwide so that in 2030, energy use across all states, so nationally, would be 10.7% below 2030 levels. So just to give you some sense of where we are today, the cumulative effects from efficiency programs over the past, say, 10 years, which still have a valid measure life, are roughly 2 or so percent. So that's a 5 times increase in the effect of efficiency programs. So in some ways, low income will be a part of that. Just to kind of give you another frame of the figures today on an incremental basis, so that is, what have programs saved? All programs have saved in terms of energy is roughly 0.6%. Now, utilities have many different pathways to reach the Section 111D, which is a carbon-focused goal. So there will, essentially, you can, reduce your use of fossil-fired resources, increasing clean energy sources such as efficiency or renewables. You can increase the heat rate at your fossil facilities. You can do some, I guess, fuel switching or load, basically using lower emitting resources at higher propensity than higher emitting resources. So essentially balancing your system better with a carbon focus as opposed to a least cost resource stack focus. And we believe that efficiency will likely be a part of the solution set. The goal by 2024 is for, at least the stated draft goal is for 1.5% energy savings across all states in the nation by 2024, which is an increase from the 0.6% that we see nationwide today. So these are just general big picture opportunities that will support energy efficiency trickling into the commercial, residential, low-income, and industrial sectors. In terms of being a fly on the wall at EEI, which is kind of my other job, so we hear a lot of discussions about what's the industry focusing on, where are they investing their resources, and understanding that there are resource constraints, not just because of a recent recession, but because the industry is regulated, and only so much can be invested either on the customer side or on the grid side every year, so that the rate impact can be as less as possible, with as much benefit for the customer and for the system as possible with those investments. So being the fly on the wall that I have the fortune to be, a lot of interests are around the resiliency and reliability of the grid. That's a big topic right now at the executive level, also at the regulatory level. A few years ago, there was a lot of discussion around smart grids, smart technologies. That discussion has sort of evolved into more of a discussion around how do we build a reliable, resilient grid, especially given the increase of distributed energy resources being hooked on to the peripheral. Connected to those DER, distributed energy resources discussion, there's a lot of, studying going on in terms of what's occurring due to the rate structure, which compensates distributed energy resource owners at a retail rate for the excess generation that they fill back into the grid. So in 40 some odd states, net energy metering policies allow for households, typically single-family homes of means to invest in solar power, to site solar on their roofs, sell energy back into the grid, and receive the retail rate. There's a lot of debates about whether there's a cost shift occurring, where this cost shift may be shifting to. Is it shifting to low-income populations? Is it shifting to apartment dwellers who don't have the means to actually site something because they don't own the property where they reside? So those are also, big picture discussions occurring within the electric utility community and the regulators. Not so much discussions around what is the smart grid. It's becoming a little bit more crystallized. It's these distributed energy resources being sited by customers or being discretely targeted by utilities in load pockets that need congestion relief. A couple of interesting proceedings are occurring in a few states, one including New York State, which has a Reforming the Energy Vision open docket. And within that open docket, ComEd has filed basically a first draft on a targeted demand-side management investment where they combined energy efficiency programs with small-scale solar and batteries to basically offset the cost of a substation upgrade. So again, where should ratepayer dollars be put in? Should it be put into the customer side for flexible management capabilities, for generation where the load is demanding it to be, or should it be put into large infrastructure investments, basically opening up the channel, to relieve the congestion, which is similar to building another lane on the highway, which if you're a highway engineer, you know that typically just introduces more traffic? Or do you want to manage the use of energy at a much more localized level through either storage of it, through renewable generation, or through efficiency improvements? So there is, I guess, an awakening that the way that electric utilities invest traditionally for the past 100 years, which has been typically supply-side investments, is changing. The technology in homes and also connected to homes is much more distributed and allows for opportunities for basically a new way for the grid to evolve. Another piece of, I guess, high-level discussion I've been hearing is who is the trusted energy advisor for households, for businesses. For many years, the utilities would commission studies, and it was this, the study would say, well, we know who, we recognize who our utility is, so we presume that they were also the trusted energy advisor. So that's another kind of big topic, is the disintermediation between the utility and their customers, and wanting to remain, I guess, in close ties or provide not just a commodity, but a service to their customer. I touched on the CO2 focus, which right now is not through a cap-and-trade system, but through a draft emissions limit per megawatt hour generated at fossil-fired power plants by state. So in terms of the timeline of 111D, just to give you guys a sense of how fast will this move, right now there's an open comment period, and if your networks, if your agencies would want to weigh in on, why do you think, how would you support 111D? Do you support an efficiency goal of 1.5% per year for all states? What does it mean for your constituents, for your audience? What benefits would you see from it from an environmental or health perspective? EPA is basically holding an open comment period before they finalize the rule. The comment period is open through October, mid-October, and the final rule will come out in June 2015. Following that, states have 1 year to file a compliance plan, or 2 years if they decide to work in a regional approach. So that's now in 2016, 2017. And then from there, that scaling up of efficiency by state, this is still kind of draft. It's modeled as what would be needed to achieve the basically an equivalent reduction in emissions, because you're reducing consumption from that emitting source. So it's not locked in stone, but it is an opportunity for the efficiency community, which will likely increase the number of, or the amount of funding, which today is, roughly, we said $7 billion, and then minus the 20%, back out the 20%, so about $6 billion today. LBNL cited about $12 billion, so a doubling from today in 2025. The EPA analysis has that number, I think, closer to 14 billion or even 20 billion, depending upon the scenario that you look at. So there's a lot of, I guess, funding that could occur, either through the continuation of current policies in place, which is what the LBNL study looks at, or an expansion of efficiency efforts across all states due to EPA regulations and states using energy efficiency as a compliance pathway to meet 111D requirements. I could take questions. I mean, I just want to give a high-level kind of perspective of what's occurring in the utility world. Again, recapping resiliency and reliability. There are there's a lot of, I guess, interest around securing coastal utilities around hurricanes or superstorm Sandy type events. There's interest to some degree around microgrids. Are they a reality? How do you actually make these systems work? Do we already have them, or we're just we're just not calling it what it is? CO2 is on the radar again through EPA Clean Air Act Section 111D. The management of distributed energy resources is very much a topic of interest, both because of the rate effects because of the net energy metering policies, and also the need to not have voltage backflow into the system through these distributed resources, which, if they pocket, could create costs on the infrastructure. And so how do you make technology investments, I guess, in a careful manner so that you increase resiliency and reliability and minimize the cost to the customer, while also being able to fund efficiency programs over the next couple of years? One last thing I want to touch on, I think I have a little bit, just 1 minute, is that there has been some pushback at the state level, and in the Midwest specifically. So Meg was discussing how, she thought I believe you said the Midwest, you thought it would be a little bit larger in terms of its funding for low-income programs. One thing is the Midwest is relatively new to the efficiency game, so in some ways they have room to grow, and their resource standards are on a growth trajectory. But there is some downward pressure that is, that kind of made the whole region look around and get a little nervous. And in Ohio and Indiana, there was some efforts by the legislature to actually freeze the efficiency. In Ohio, it was to freeze the goal for 2 years. And for utilities that had already ran programs, they banked enough savings to meet the goals. So there is a concern around whether these utilities would file programs to continue to deliver services to their customers. And luckily, they have filed programs. And in Indiana, there is effectively a defunding of the state agency that runs what's called the core program. So, I guess, fundamental energy efficiency programs. So at the end of this year, though, the state, the third-party administrator, which runs the statewide programs, will not have funding. There's a question of, will the ratepayer, the investor in utilities, will they pick it up or not? And it seems like from the recent filings, they will pick up those core programs. So there's a little bit of, I guess, legislative pushback on some of these goals that have been set in the Midwest, and that's just a topic that I wanted to flag, because that does, it does influence whether not just low-income programs will be funded, but all programs. So I'd be happy to take questions if you have them, or to clarify any points. I know I rattled off a few numbers.
Mike, do I see that you're, yes, go ahead.
Yes, Adam. In trying to meet some of these goals, has there been discussion, especially in the low-income population and programs, on how you deal with the health and safety issues that are barriers to providing deeper measures in the conservation programs?
You mean in terms of, I guess, monetizing or measuring the health and safety benefits or aspects of efficiency program.
Or even addressing them, because normally you defer that particular client, so you're not achieving the savings?
Yeah.
Health and safety issues such as mold, moisture, asbestos, lead, knob and tube, things that normally aren't allowable or achievable under the ratepayer funds?
I think, one, your question may get beyond my detailed knowledge of that specific, that specific population, but that could be covered under efforts to include non-energy benefits. So there are efforts to count these non-energy saving benefits that, whomever the recipient of the efficiency measure may be. It could be, it could be low income, it could be not, residential, it could be even commercial, industrial in terms of health, safety, noise abatement aspects. So there are some states that, allow for some degree of non-energy benefits. There are some proxies for carbon, but in terms of those specific, respiratory-related benefits, I actually don't know specific examples, but that's within NARUC, the National Association of Regulatory Utility Commissioners, there's a Energy Resources and Environment group, and there has been discussions around what is the right, total resource cost test. What are the right sort of parameters to put into those tests? And that's still an ongoing discussion, but I don't know specifically where it kind of stands in terms of, mold, asbestos, those specific, barriers.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Anybody have their mic on?
Okay, if everybody would just mute their speakers, their microphones.
We got it. We found the problem. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Question? Somebody? Yes, Elizabeth.
So I wanted to follow up on something you said about distributed generation, and that
Right.
folks are talking about the impact to low income, because who's left paying when the most wealthy customers are able to do these measures and start producing their own electricity. You end up with low-income customers paying for their own programs out of their rates. So is the Edison or the Edison Foundation working on this issue? What's their position? I'm just
the position
interested in knowing more.
So there's a group called CCIF, I believe it's the Critical Consumers Issues Forum, and that is it's a collaborative where I believe there's utility members of EEI along with some set of state commissioners, and I believe NASUCA organizations and energy efficiency advocacy groups or environmental advocacy groups who have signed on to, I believe, 24 or so principles around essentially net energy metering practices. And in general, the highest common understanding is it should be fair, right? How you define fair will vary, but there is a group that has set out around 24 principles addressing that issue. And our group, we've identified the amount of cost shift using California California rates, which actually, since the schedule is so, I guess, in some ways aggressive as you move into the higher tiers, that credit value is quite large. So there's, but I think it's demonstrative in terms of the impact. There's a group called, I believe, E3 Consulting, and they did a study for the California Public Utilities Commission, which said, I don't quote me on the year, but in the mid 2020s, they estimated roughly a $1 billion per year cost shift just in California, with a certain penetration of distributed energy resources, primarily solar. So, we'll put together some research pieces on it, but there's other groups like CCF which are working more on a consensus or consortium process around principles, which is, also there's been a few resolutions adopted by NARUC, generally in aligning to some of those. I don't believe there's been an explicit endorsement, but CCIF would have a little bit more information in terms of who signed on to the principles and what sort of, whether it's, what the exact details are in terms of endorsements versus, I guess, understandings of best practices.
Any other questions from the room? Oh, I'm sorry, I just saw you came back. Any other questions from the room? There are no online questions at this point, but I have a couple of quick questions.
Okay.
When you were talking about NARUC and looking at the total resource cost test, are they coming up with something, are they attempting to come up with something as a unified position of NARUC for utility commissioners, or a recommendation to states, since states have the latitude of...
I think it tends to be educational, so I believe that they would bring it, they have brought in different parties to explain the reasons why a non-energy benefits component should or should not be included. I think like in the end these meetings tend to be a little bit more on the educational side, and then the actual, I guess, application of that knowledge is left to the individual state commissioners.
Because that is, just that one issue is such an important one in terms of how efficiency and renewables get considered.
Right.
And it's been one subject of debates at the state level at regulatory commissioners for, I know I've worked on it 20 years ago, and the scope of it and how it specifically it is defined as determining efficiency and renewable policies.
Well, right, and some of the, I guess, the weatherization efforts, you have to think about, like when I think about not moving on from the non-energy benefits discussion, but to like the CO2 aspects, a lot of these cost tests are, you have these measures that pass and they have a very short measure life. It's a quick bang, and it may be lighting over something that's a little bit more long-lasting. Lighting is important for, I guess, for bill savings, but maybe not so much for heat and comfort, right? So, I think that when you look at, CO2 and how to include that, not, what should these cost tests incorporate some sort of carbon calculation as opposed to an avoided cost of building a hypothetical combined cycle 500 megawatt gas turbine, which is typically what the avoided cost test is set against. So I see an evolution potentially away from the avoided cost, the avoided cost being that combined cycle gas turbine to, or if you keep that, maybe you have to layer in some sort of cost of carbon, because when you want to meet a carbon objective, compliance plan and using energy efficiency programs, you have to redo your cost effectiveness test, I believe. Right now, I don't think that the states would be able to meet them without some sort of adjustment to those avoided cost measures.
Another question over there. That'll be the last one.
Okay.
Yep.
Adam, this really isn't a question. I guess it's just more of a comment and an observation. Tyson Slocum was here yesterday from Public Citizen. He was talking about some of the EPA public comments. You're talking about the 111D opportunity. And for low-income energy advocates through the Community Action Network in this country, we are always looking for opportunities to get engaged and make comments and grow some of what we're doing. So 111D could be an opportunity, and yet at the same time, with the elections coming up, another state you didn't hit on was North Carolina and their renewable energy standards, and how a former Duke Energy employee who's now in their legislature is really trying to repeal their standards with some help from the Koch brothers. And
it's really difficult. You know, you don't know what to strategize as something to move forward on, and sit back and watch and see what happens.
Well, and I guess my simple take on energy efficiency versus renewable energy is you have a least cost resource and a most cost resource, and they get bundled together, and mostly for an environmental reason, but sometimes you have to be strategic in terms of what you're supporting. Thank you.
Thank you, Adam. Very thoughtful.